For writing today, we are learning to write a fantasy story by including a rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution in our rough draft or our first draft. Today, we're going to focus on the rising action of the story. So you can see that I have my story map, my plot diagram out right here, and I have all of the parts filled in with some information. What I did in order to write my story, you can see right here is where the rising action starts. Remember, the rising action is where the problem starts to happen. So I already did my background, my expositions, that we understand the characters. We know that they live in Harlem. They have a small farm, including chickens, and that they are wizards or have magical powers of some kind, as most fantasy texts have. So we're going to work on the rising action. My rising action is usually the biggest part of my text. We're actually going to have more than one day to try to build out this rising action. The rising action in the story is about half a page. What I did in order to make this rising action was look at the ideas I already came up with. Taking care of the farm, watering and feeding the chickens, chicken given food while boy casts a spell, even though he doesn't realize he can, chicken grows huge and runs away. So I used those ideas in that sequence to help me build my rising action. You can see that I added in some details like time. It was a normal day like any other. It was 5 a.m. and I just got up to do my chores before heading to school. That's how I explain that the chores are watering and feeding the chickens. And you can see here that I give some details about some of the plants, some of the vegetables that are being watered. I give, again, more time so that the reader knows how long has passed. Then I move on to feeding the chickens. So that's the second part of this. Again, chickens do not belong in the city. So I add in some humor to make the story a little bit more fun. Again, adding in some humor, talking about chickens, talking about how we feed the chickens and some things that chickens do. We know that chickens peck at food. So I said the chicken started pecking at the boy. It happens all the time. Now we're going into more of the problem. There's one chicken who always seems to miss the food, Cliff. When he was a chick, his beak got messed up. Now I have to feed him personally each morning. So I'm giving some background on why this chicken is different than others. And maybe that morning, I started to wish that his beak was bigger, and maybe I even said it out loud. Here we go with the casting of the spell. Instead of just saying, the character's name is Mitch that we learned at the beginning, instead of just saying, Mitch casts a spell, I tried to add in some details to make the story a little bit more interesting. And again, he doesn't even realize, even though he doesn't realize he can, here he doesn't realize that he can cast a spell. Maybe I even said it out loud. And out of nowhere, just like my mom had always said, his beak grew. So that's when he kind of realizes that he can cast a spell. It didn't grow back to a normal beak, but instead it grew to the size of me. These details make our story a lot more interesting. Instead of fixing the problem, he casts a spell So I decided to fix the problem, but instead of casting a spell to make his beak smaller, I accidentally made it bigger. Again, he doesn't realize how to do these spells. I'm new with this magic stuff, he says. He doesn't realize really how to do that, so he's trying his best. And then adding in some noise that we might hear in the city, like boom, when a car crashed, and that is why the chicken, Cliff, ran away. So I used these 3 details that I had to make my rising action. I didn't want to just say Mitch was taking care of the farm, Mitch waters and feeds the chickens, Mitch gave one of the chickens food and accidentally cast a spell, even though he didn't realize he can. I didn't use these exact words, but I used the ideas that I had to write this story, okay? When you're doing your work, use your ideas. It doesn't have to be as long as my rising action is. It can be shorter. It can be as long. It's up to you. It's how many details you add in. Try to add in some quotes into your writing. Try to add in some background noise into your writing. Add in details to make your writing more interesting. As you are writing your rising action today, make sure that you're using your graphic organizer that you've already filled in. Make sure that you're thinking about your exposition and thinking about your climax. Your rising action should be part of your story. It should relate to all parts of your story. Remember that the rising action is when the reader learns about the problems or conflicts, so make sure that you have in your writing a problem or some ideas of a problem and some conflict.